She was a teen growing up in Scarborough in the early 1990s when she answered the siren call of hate and joined the neo-Nazi group, the Heritage Front. He was the head of the Canadian Jewish Congress. That's where their quite incredible story begins, and now we're pleased to pick up on that story here in our studio tonight. She is Elizabeth Moore. He is Bernie Farber, now Executive Director of the Mosaic Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome this generation's version of The Odd Couple to TVO tonight. All right, Elizabeth, I want to start with you, and I want to sort of pick up the story from where we left off in that introduction. You've joined the Heritage Front. Let's start with why.
Why? There is no simple answer to that question, but there were many circumstances that led me into the Heritage Front. There were some issues at home, nothing
You're a
serious.
Teenager at the time,
yeah,
right?
I was a teenager. There, nothing serious. I wasn't getting beaten at home or anything, but home life was not entirely happy. I felt very alienated at my school. I was being picked on a bit, as a lot of kids are, and there was also a very sort of unique demographic happening at my school at the time. There were both very different cultural groups moving into the neighborhood, and they were also divided along class and economic lines. So you had immigrants from Hong Kong coming in at the time who were very well off, and then you had people mostly from Jamaica who were living in public housing. And there was animosity flying in all directions. It was a real powder keg at my school.
So this group sort of provided some semblance of sanity in an otherwise insane world, or how would you describe it?
They provided black and white answers to a whole lot of gray area that was very difficult for someone who was 17, 18 years old to navigate.
Now, you reached out to him, though, right? At some point, what happened in your head that you just thought, I'm going to call Bernie Farber of the Canadian Jewish Congress because I've got some questions about what's going on?
Oh, that didn't happen until much later, though. That didn't happen until I was ready to leave the Heritage Front.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, we're sort of cutting to the chase here, right? You're with this group. At some point, you start questioning what you're doing in this group, right?
Yeah.
And so you reach out to Bernie. Why'd you do that?
Because he was the person that I was most familiar with, who was on, quote unquote, the other side. He was always there. His organization, Canadian Jewish Congress at the time, was constantly laying legal charges against members of the Heritage Front. If there was a court case, if there was press to do, he was there. And he also struck me as a person who was, I can't actually say honest because at that time, my views of the world were so skewed, but I saw him as someone who was solid and that someone that would give me straight answers and that I could trust. And I didn't know who else to call.
Now, Bernie, I'm going to guess that your phone at that time was not ringing every day with members of the Heritage Front saying, can we go out for coffee? I got to talk to this guy. So how did you know when Elizabeth called you that it wasn't nefarious, it wasn't a trap, it wasn't...
Well, it's an interesting story. I was speaking at various university campuses at the time, and it so happened that I was speaking one evening at Queen's University, and there was a large group. There must have been 200 or 300 people there, and I was speaking about, the rise of neo-Nazism, the Heritage Front, and we knew who the bad guys and bad girls were at the time. And there, sure enough, in the front row was Elizabeth Moore, as I was kind of talking about her, because she was very much a face of the Heritage Front. The Nazis loved to use young, attractive women as their, as their front face, so to speak. And they became very damaged as a result as well, which Elizabeth, I'm sure, will tell you about. But while I am talking about who to look out for, there she was taking notes, and I was looking straight at her, and I guess I very well could have pointed her out, but I chose not to because I thought that
which I appreciate.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that could have been certainly not the right thing to do. And I think that was part of why at the end, she reached out to me, I think, the next day at my office and called me and said, and thanked me for not exposing her, so to speak, and basically said, I'd like to meet. And I said, sure. I was not going to say no. And I think I heard in her voice kind of a bit of a plaintive plea.
Well, let's find out about that plaintive plea. So we're in Kingston now, right?
Yes.
It's in Kingston, having just done this event at Queen's, and you call him up and you go out and you meet, and what are you asking him?
At the time, I think I just wanted to know what to do. I was at the point where, you know, I think I had, in my mind, laid a lot of the groundwork of just, you know, really seeing what the Heritage Front was all about, really seeing who these neo-Nazis were, and understanding that I didn't want my life and the people in my life to be revolving around hatred. But, you know, this was pre-internet, this was really pre-access to information the way we have today, and I didn't know how one goes about leaving a potentially dangerous organization.
So how did that first meeting with Bernie go?
It was tense.
Yeah,
it was tense.
It was tense for sure. More, I think, on Elizabeth's part than on mine. I was just prepared to hear her out. I come from a social work background. I think a lot of people think I'm a lawyer because of all the legal cases I've been in, but actually I come from a social work background. I was involved with the Children's Aid Society for years and many other youth programs. So it was really a chance to take a look at, you know, where Elizabeth was coming from. And there was no doubt in my mind that she wanted out. But how does one extricate oneself from such a powerful grasp? And
safely.
Safely.
Yeah. That's the big question.
Yeah.
How do you do it safely?
Because you're afraid to leave, I guess, eh?
Yeah.
Well, the consequences could be quite injurious to your health.
Yes.
Okay, so you have the meeting in Kingston, and then, what is it, a few months later you meet again in Toronto?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, Bernie, tell me about that meeting.
So the meeting took place in my office at the Canadian Jewish Congress headquarters at the Lipa Green building at the time. And I made the decision at that point. We were attached to, as it is today, the Holocaust Education and Memorial Center. It's now called the Nuremberg Holocaust Center, which is an amazing place for people to go to. And
it's in the northwest part of Toronto.
Yeah, it's Bathurst and Shepherd. And I made a decision to take her on a tour of the center. I suppose I wanted in the back of my mind, I mean, here was a young woman who was the face of the Heritage Front, but Holocaust deniers, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and here I was, a child of a Holocaust survivor, having fought neo-Nazism much of my professional adult life. And here was this opportunity to walk somebody through the Holocaust Center and see what kind of response, because to me, her response was going to judge whether or not I was going to continue with this.
So let's find out. What impact did that tour have on you?
Huge.
How so?
Yes. By the time I went into the museum with him, I knew I wanted out. That was not in question, but I hadn't fully confronted my beliefs yet. And, you know, I just didn't know where I was on all of that. And so when we first met in his office and he was confronting me about different things, I couldn't even really respond because I just had all this garbage in my head that I didn't know. And so then we went in and then being confronted with the evidence was just, you know, emotionally very overwhelming. And I remember there was one moment we walked up to this picture, and there's this hallway when you go in filled with pictures of people who were killed during the Holocaust. And it was a portrait of a baby, and, you know, just your typical portrait that you get of little children. And he pointed at this child and said, "This baby was killed in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Now you tell me what this baby had to do with any Jewish conspiracy." I still get emotional today over that. And I just...
How did you respond to that?
I don't think I even said anything.
I'll tell you what you said.
I don't remember what I said.
You said to me, "I don't know how I lost my humanity."
Yes, that's
that,
right.
And I said to you, well, the good thing about humanity is you can always get it back.
Yeah. Because what really struck me at that time was that here were these people being quite literally killed for being themselves, and they were fighting with everything they had to maintain their humanity. And I felt like I had just willingly given mine away. And it felt really hopeless until he said, you know, well, you can always get it back. And that really became something that I grasped onto in the months following when I finally left the Heritage Front and went through some very painful personal times of trying to rebuild my life, that I can do this. I can really get it back.
It took time, though. It was a process.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she had to do, which I think was the most difficult thing for you to do, you had a boyfriend at the time in the front. And I said, look, my father used to say, if you want to chop off a dog's tail, do you chop it off little by little, or do you just chop it? And I used to say to him, why would you want to chop off a dog's tail? But in this case, she needed to make a clean, complete, and total break.
With this guy.
With this guy, with the front, with everything. And as long as she still had this relationship, the break was not going to happen. And I think that was one of the toughest pieces for you at that time.
It was.
And you did break up
difficult.
with him?
I did, yeah.
How did he take it?
Not well. Not well.
Okay, that's the boyfriend. How about the front? When you did you? How did you do it? How did you break up with the front?
At first, it was slowly pulling back from the things that I was active in. I was a writer, and I suppose an assistant editor after fashion for their magazine. Again, pre-internet, so you know they had stuff in print, and I was involved with a hate line, a telephone hate line, recording outgoing messages on it. So I had to slowly stop all of these activities without raising suspicion. I'm sure I didn't succeed.
Just tell me this, why could you not go to whoever the head of the front was at the time? I don't know, was it Wolfgang Droege?
Wolfgang Droege.
Why couldn't you just go to him and just say, you know what, I've had a change of heart, I'm out of here?
Because I could have been hurt.
You think he would have beaten you up?
I don't
Something.
know. I don't know. I know that there were people who had been under suspicion of, giving some information to anti-racist activists, and they ended up being beaten up and hurt quite badly.
So did you two work on a strategy to figure out how to extricate her safely?
There wasn't a lot of strategies available at that time. Nobody thought about these things.
So
nobody understood. We took it step by step. I mean, as Liz said, she slowly took herself out. And by the way, she was one of a couple of women that were involved in the Heritage Front, both of whom actually, Elizabeth and another young woman by the name of Elisa Hannigan, both of them ended up being heroes in terms of how they were able to take themselves out, how they were able to work with the system to basically shut down the Heritage Front. And so, in this particular case, it's kind of interesting that the women were the heroes and shutting this down. There were others involved as well, the so-called Grant Bristow affair and everything that went with him. He was the mole that was in. But all of this came together as a result of the women who finally took a stand and said, we're not going to deal with this anymore. And it was a step-by-step, slow process. I mean, I tell you one more kind of funny story. That same night after I did not expose Elizabeth, 2 days later I happened to be in court on a Wolfgang Droege matter. And this might be TMI, but I was in the washroom and Wolfgang came up beside me and he leaned over to me and he said, "Thank you for not exposing Elizabeth." Turned around and walked away.
Ooh, how'd that make you feel?
It was kind of creepy.
It was kind of creepy,
to say the least.
And just to clarify, once you eventually did extricate yourself from the group, were there any consequences, physical and or emotional or otherwise?
Fortunately, the consequences from Heritage Front members were minimal, and I'm to this day very grateful for that. There were some awkward things from my ex-boyfriend. He sent flowers to my parents' house. He would send letters. And that would be very creepy. My parents' house was also located at the time literally within view of another Heritage Front member's house. So when I'd returned to Toronto to visit my family, it was always a very stressful time, just never being sure, am I safe or not? Have they seen me or not? But fortunately, I was okay. Emotionally, on a personal level, I had so much rebuilding to do because my entire worldview had formed around a racist lens. Everything from what I ate to what I watched on television, like everything.
To who your friends could be.
Yes, exactly.
Who your friends couldn't be.
Exactly. And so it took a long time, a lot of self-exploration on my part to, I guess, find myself again. And I was also very lucky that I was at Queen's and I had the opportunity to take courses to educate myself. I took courses in Holocaust history, I took courses in racism in Canada, and those helped tremendously in kind of sorting things out in my mind and setting the record straight for me.
Bernie, how much of Elizabeth's story do you think is kind of transferable in as much as if you're looking to de-radicalize or deprogram somebody from a hateful past, is this a template for it?
It is a template, but there's one thing that I've learned. You can never extricate somebody who does not want to be extricated. You may remember back even years ago during the days of cults and what have you, that people were actually kidnapped out of cults and they attempted to deprogram them. Much of that did not work, we're finding out today. Elizabeth wanted to get out. And
so by the time she met you, she was well on the way.
She was ready, but she needed that push. And now if I was able to give that push, that was great. And by the way, there were two others that came to me afterwards as well, who were significant members of neo-Nazi groups. One did get out and is out. One, I don't know what happened to them. But for some reason, I became a bit of a father confessor to these people, only because I suppose of my visibility. And if I were able to give them that push, I did. If I believed in the heart of my hearts that that's really what they wanted. But there needs to be a sense there that the person really wants to find a way out.
And on the other side, Elizabeth, what is the lesson from your experience for today's kids who may find themselves rootless, looking for a quote-unquote pack to join so that they feel that they've got some kind of tight unit that they can belong to? What's the lesson from your experience about how not to have that happen, obviously?
The lesson, I would say, is to think for yourself and do your research. And you know, today there is just so much information out there, both true and fake, and that, you know, you have to think for yourself. If somebody tells you something that seems a bit out there, like, oh, well, you know, the Holocaust didn't really happen, or it wasn't really as bad as they want you to believe, that it's up to you to go onto the internet and find out for yourself.
Let me ask you one last question, and that is, I mean, having made this transformation, you could very nicely just go back to, you know, whatever life you wanted to have. You don't have to come on television. You don't have to be as out there on this as you have been, but you are. How come?
I had done a lot of educational work up until I think about 2006. And at that point, I just really needed to move forward with my life and put the past in the past. And now the political environment has changed so radically. And I look at the children who are in my life now and what sort of world I want them to inherit when they grow up. And I know what I don't want in it. I don't want neo-Nazis. I don't want racism. I don't want hate. And I feel a sense of responsibility that I have a story that I can share. And so it is up to me to share it and try to create some good.
And we're glad both of you came into TVO tonight to share your unique story. Elizabeth Moore, Bernie Farber, thanks so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.